All right. Well, we're going to start with just a bit of a welcome and introduction. So welcome. But it's really great to be in person, isn't it? I'm so glad that God worked this out. And we had this room for the previous class. We even paid for it and everything. And then we went Zoom. And so now we're using. So basically this is like the longest booking ever. Probably like 4 or 5 months in the works, you know. So hopefully you do like your experience here. Yeah. So I wanted to give you an overview of today's program. We're going to start with, as you can see, we're a little bit running behind, but hopefully we'll catch up. But we'll start with the introduction to the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. And then we'll go through, and I just want to remind you, this is a survey, so it's not deep dive into each and every aspect of it. So hopefully we, at the end of this day, we can get a better sense of the first 5 books of the Bible. We'll break up Genesis 1 to 11, and then we'll do Genesis 12 to 50. As you can see, there's time for Q&R, and there's breaks. So please feel free to ask a lot of questions and also share what you're learning. So it's Q&R, so it's question and response. So I'd love to hear your response, what you're learning in the session itself. And then we'll have lunch. I made sure that's bolded. And we're going to go downstairs for lunch. I'm really excited about that. And then after lunch, we'll go through Leviticus, which hopefully won't put us to sleep. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be irreverent of God's word, but it is hard to read Leviticus. It's okay to admit that. But hopefully what we will learn helps us to read it with fresh eyes. And then we'll go through Numbers, and then Deuteronomy, and then we'll close out with the Torah in the New Testament, which hopefully is going to be exciting, you know. So let's start with the introduction to the Torah. As I said, Torah is just the first 5 books of the Bible, and it's also called the Pentateuch, which penta means 5, so it's the first 5 books of the Bible. And this is a quiz question. You can always, you know, ask list the first 5 books of the Bible, and hopefully you'll all have the answers, you know. And so the first 5 books of the Bible, and here's the key: we're to read it as one narrative. And I'll say this, you know, when I started studying the Bible and reading the Bible 20 years back, I never read the Bible as a whole. I'd read verses at first, you know, a few verses, and then maybe a chapter. Even for my quiet time, I'll read a chapter, and the next day I'll read another chapter or whatever. And over years I've been taught, and it's been very helpful to see the Bible as a unified document. If you've watched the Bible Project, that's one of the taglines, you know. And same as the Torah, Genesis to Deuteronomy, is one large narrative. And that's what we're going to look at now, just a very high level overview of Genesis to Deuteronomy, because it's so easy to get lost in the trees, I guess. You know, we're just looking at all the little details, and we start asking a lot of questions that then take us down all kinds of interesting rabbit holes. And it's really helpful to step back and just see this whole story just kind of be presented, and then we're able to understand where all the little details fit. And so we'll start with Genesis 1 to 3. And it's really a story of creation and fall. And the result of the fall is, you can see it goes from bad to worse, from Genesis 4 all the way to 11. And in Genesis 12, God calls this man named Abram, and he says, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So this is God calling one man, through whom will come a people, through whom the whole world will be blessed. And the call of Abraham and his descendants was to be God's instruments through whom God will bless the whole world, will reconcile the whole world. And at the end of Genesis, you'll find Abraham's family is in Egypt. In Genesis 50, verse 22, Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the third generation of Ephraim's children, also the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones from this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So that's where the story ends. But the very next, as the story continues, you read Exodus 1. And Exodus 1, these are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family. And it kind of goes through that, the genealogy. And then if you pick up the reading in verse 8, then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. And when we look at Exodus, we'll kind of have an interesting historical lesson on this verse. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. So as you can see, Genesis ends and the story picks up with Abram's family in Egypt. Now they're enslaved in Egypt. And God rescues his people with a mighty hand. And then God instructs his people how to live. And that's what the law means. When people use the word law, today it means something so different for us. But the Torah is translated as law, simply means instruction. So God gives his people instruction on how to live. And Torah is also narrative, so you have to keep that in mind. That really helps to answer to really think about the law. Law is instruction, law is command, yes, but law is also narrative. Torah is narrative from Genesis to Deuteronomy. And part of the narrative is God giving his people the law so they can live. And then check out what happens, Exodus 40. Then Moses set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and altar and put up the curtain at the entrance to the courtyard. And so Moses finished the work. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. So Exodus ends with God now coming and tabernacling with his people. And that's also a really key part of the story. Genesis 1 and 2 is God creating us, God coming to dwell, live amongst his people. We'll see that more closely when we look at the primeval narrative. But then sin comes into the world, and so now there's separation between God's space and human space. But Exodus 40 is this mobile tabernacle where God is now dwelling with his people, but it's not the same as Genesis 1. So then Leviticus comes, So hopefully you're seeing the flow of it. It's the tabernacle, end of Exodus, Leviticus, and we read Leviticus with the worldview of God residing with His people. And so how should His people live with the Holy God? And that's the lens with which we want to read Leviticus. So Leviticus 11:45, I am the Lord who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore be holy, because I am holy. And so all of Leviticus is really about how to enter into relationship with the Holy God, how to do that. And then we go into Numbers. Numbers is where it's the challenge of Egypt. So Numbers 1 verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting in the desert of Sinai on the first day of the second month of the second year after the Israelites came out of Egypt. He said, take a census of the whole Israelite community by the clans, families, listing every man by name one by one. So this is the generation that left Egypt. But Numbers is about, did Egypt ever leave them? And so the first generation left Egypt physically, but Egypt never left them spiritually and in really every way. And so they end up dying off in the wilderness. And Numbers 26, we pick up the story of the second generation. In verse 63, these are the ones counted by Moses and Eleazar the priest when they counted the Israelites on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. Not one of them was among those counted by Moses and Aaron the priest when they counted the Israelites in the desert of Sinai. For the Lord had told those Israelites they would surely die in the wilderness, and not one of them was left except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. And that's the story of Numbers. It's the first generation dies off, and the second generation is being prepped. And then Deuteronomy, where they now are being, they're waiting before they get into the promised land in Joshua. So Deuteronomy 1 verse 1, these are the words Moses spoke to all Israel in the wilderness east of the Jordan. And what's he saying to them? He's saying that, he says in verse 3, in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses proclaimed to the Israelites all that the Lord had commanded him concerning them. This was after he had defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, and Edrei had defeated Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth, east of the Jordan, in the territory of Moab. Moses began to expound this law, saying, and then it continues, it's almost like a recap. He explains all that took place, and then he calls this next generation to be faithful to God's covenant. But hopefully this is making sense, that this is the large narrative that we are hearing, that we read from Genesis to Deuteronomy. And the story is of God, is of His creation, of rebellion, of calling of His people through whom God will redeem the entire humanity. And it's that people's failure as well as hope, which in a sense mirrors the human failure and human hope, the humanity's failure and humanity's hope. And it ends in Deuteronomy as they eagerly wait to cross to the other side of the Jordan. So the Torah, or the law, is Eden, exile, and hopeful waiting. It's almost like the promised land becomes a return to Eden. The Torah is about God, people of God, and then through the people of God, the rest of humanity. It's very missional in that sense. And another key element of the Torah is, and we'll see this when we look at Genesis 1-11, is that how is order being established in human society? It's really about community formation. How can people live as human society in relationship with God and in relationship with each other in a way that reflects God's glory, in a way that honors God? And the last point is the obvious point. God is willing to let us wander so we can learn the lessons He wants us to learn. And I think that's a really important point that comes out of Genesis to Deuteronomy. We want to learn those lessons soon. Otherwise, He's got no problem letting us just wander around in circles till we actually get the lessons. And I wanted to say that because you are young ministers, and you have this privilege of being the next generation, and that is hopefully something that myself, my generation, but certainly as well as you, and your generation, take to heart, that we want to learn the lessons God is teaching us, or else we're just going to kind of keep wandering the desert. And so it's essential that we are humble, we listen, we take what God's teaching us seriously, and obey what He's calling us to. And so as we continue on, I think you'll see there's a lot of lessons that we can glean from Genesis to Deuteronomy, and we'll see, like I said in the last session, how the Torah pops up in the New Testament. So that's the overall really big picture of Genesis to Deuteronomy. Any questions, any responses?